When America was plunged into World War II, the shockwave of Pearl Harbor did more than just send a nation to war. It ignited a fire in its people. The call to arms echoed far beyond the military recruitment offices. It was a call that resonated in kitchens, on farms, in classrooms, and on factory floors. While millions of young men donned uniforms, a second, vast army mobilized at home. This was the army of the home front, a force of over 100 million ordinary Americans who understood that this was a total war. A war that would be won not just by bullets, but by production, sacrifice, and an ironclad collective will. These were the heroes without headlines, the quiet patriots whose daily grind would become the foundation of the Allied victory. They were the men too old to fight, the women who had never held a job, the children eager to help, all united by a profound sense of duty. The government helped channel this energy. The Office of Civilian Defense, or OCD, was formed, and within a year, millions of Americans had signed up. They became air raid wardens, volunteer firefighters, and auxiliary police, training for an attack that they prayed would never come. But this was just the beginning. The real war at home would be fought on multiple fronts, in the noisy, dangerous factories, in the quiet, sterile labs, and in the fertile, demanding soil of the heartland. This was a societal transformation on a scale never seen before. Sunday drives and leisurely dinners were replaced by gas rationing and scrap drives. The nation collectively rolled up its sleeves, ready to tackle the monumental task of supplying not just its own army, but the entire free world. Every citizen was a soldier in this new kind of war. Every man, woman, and child was asked, "What can you do?" And the answer, from all corners of the nation, was a resounding, "Anything it takes." The American Red Cross was the beating heart of the home front's humanitarian effort. Its emblem, a simple red cross on a white background, became a universal symbol of hope and compassion. Millions of volunteers, the vast majority of them women, became its lifeblood. Their most visible and vital task was managing the new, critical Blood for Victory program. This was a medical revolution. At the helm was Dr. Charles R. Drew, an African-American surgeon and a true unsung hero, who developed the system for processing and storing blood plasma on a mass scale. His work allowed plasma, which could be given to any soldier regardless of blood type, to be shipped to the front lines, saving countless lives. Volunteers organized massive blood drives in town halls, churches, and factories, comforting nervous donors and meticulously handling every precious pint. Tragically, and in a bitter irony, the program initially segregated blood by race, a policy Dr. Drew himself protested as unscientific and insulting. It was a stark reminder of the social divisions that persisted even in this time of unity. But the Red Cross volunteers did so much more. They gathered in community centers and church basements to roll millions upon millions of sterile bandages, their hands working tirelessly as they chatted, shared news from their sons, and worried together. They packed comfort kits for soldiers, filling them with cigarettes, candy, sewing kits, and stationery. For prisoners of war, they assembled food parcels, navigating the complex bureaucracy of war to get a taste of home to men in enemy camps. They also mobilized a fleet of clubmobiles. These were retrofitted buses, staffed by resourceful young women, which drove directly to the front lines in Europe. They would serve fresh donuts, hot coffee, and a kind smile to exhausted soldiers just pulled from combat, a simple, powerful reminder of what they were fighting for. The image of Rosie the Riveter, with her blue overalls and determined gaze, is perhaps the most iconic of the home front. But she was not just a poster. She was 6 million real women who, motivated by patriotism and for the first time the promise of a decent paycheck, flooded into America's factories. These women left their lives as homemakers, waitresses, or shop girls to enter a world of heavy industry that had been exclusively male. They learned to be welders, riveters, electricians, and mechanics. They built the B-17 bombers, the Sherman tanks, and the Liberty ships that formed the backbone of the Allied war machine. The work was grueling, deafening, and often incredibly dangerous. They worked 10 or 12-hour shifts, often at night, handling massive machinery and toxic materials. Explosions, industrial accidents, and exhaustion were constant threats. Yet they persevered, driven by the knowledge that their work was vital. This new reality created profound social challenges. These women were still expected to be mothers and homemakers. This led to the rise of the latchkey kid, as children came home from school to empty houses. Rudimentary, 24-hour childcare centers sprang up near factories, but they were too few and far between. They also faced resentment. Male co-workers, and even unions, were often hostile, skeptical that women could perform men's work. And the pay, while good, was almost never equal. Rosies were typically paid 60% of what the men they replaced had earned. Yet, they built a newfound camaraderie. They formed bowling leagues, shared childcare, and supported each other through the long shifts and the anxious wait for letters from the front. They proved, to the nation and to themselves, that they were capable of anything. The output was staggering. At the Kaiser shipyards, women helped build Liberty ships in as little as 4 days. At the Willow Run plant in Michigan, a plane that once took a month to build was rolling off the assembly line every 63 minutes. These women were, quite literally, building the arsenal that would win the war. While the factories roared, a quieter, equally vital battle was being fought in America's fields. The slogan, "Food will win the war and right the peace," was not just propaganda, it was a literal, strategic directive. The farmers of America were tasked with feeding their own nation, their massive army, and their starving allies. This challenge was monumental. The war had siphoned off millions of young men, the prime source of farm labor. At the same time, rationing boards restricted access to new machinery, gasoline, tires, and fertilizer. Farmers were asked to produce more than ever before, with less of everything. They responded with sheer, back-breaking toil. Farmers, many of them middle-aged or older, worked from sun-up to sundown, 7 days a week. They became master mechanics, tinkering with old, failing equipment, welding broken parts, and using every ounce of ingenuity to keep their farms running. Their wives and children worked alongside them, taking on grueling tasks once reserved for hired hands. The farm wife was a hero in her own right, managing the household, tending the victory garden for the family's own food, and then heading out to drive a tractor or milk the cows. To fill the labor gap, the government created the Women's Land Army. Thousands of young women, many from cities with no farm experience, were sent to the countryside to help. They lived in rural dorms and provided a crucial, seasonal workforce, harvesting the crops that were a matter of life and death. Similarly, the Victory Farm Volunteers program mobilized teenagers. Over 500,000 high school students would spend their summer vacation, not at the beach, but in the fields, picking fruit, detasseling corn, and harvesting vegetables, all in the name of victory. These farmers, through sheer grit and resilience, achieved a production miracle. They prevented hunger at home, supplied the K rations and C rations for the troops, and sent massive shipments of food to Britain and Russia, literally sustaining the Allied cause. The war was not just fought with brawn, it was won with brains. Far from the public eye, in secret laboratories and hidden cities, an army of scientists, engineers, and academics waged a silent, high-stakes war of technology. They were organized under the Office of Scientific Research and Development, or OSRD. Their breakthroughs were game-changing. At the MIT Rad Lab, scientists worked around the clock to perfect radar technology. Their miniature airborne radar sets allowed American planes to see in the dark, hunt U-boats in the Atlantic, and bomb targets through dense cloud cover. Another miracle was medical. Penicillin, a scientific curiosity before the war, was transformed into a mass-produced wonder drug. Scientists at a lab in Peoria, Illinois, discovered a new strain of mold on a cantaloupe that dramatically increased output. This breakthrough saved hundreds of thousands of lives from infection. The most secret and most world-changing was the Manhattan Project. The government created entire secret cities, like Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Los Alamos, New Mexico. Tens of thousands of people worked there, many of them women, with no idea what they were working on. They were told, "What you see here, what you do here, what you hear here, let it stay here." They were simply checking dials or monitoring pipes, unaware they were enriching uranium and building the components for the atomic bomb. They were the unsung, unknowing heroes of the nuclear age. And then there were the spies. The Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, was the precursor to the CIA. It recruited a motley crew of academics, actors, and linguists. They became spies, propagandists, and saboteurs, working behind enemy lines in occupied Europe and Asia. One unsung hero was Virginia Hall, an American woman with a wooden leg, who became one of the most dangerous and effective spies in France. The Gestapo called her the Limping Lady, and she coordinated resistance networks and organized supply drops, a true hero in the shadows. While factory workers built the sword, another group of heroes spent their days and nights guarding the shield. These were the millions of volunteers of the Office of Civilian Defense. Their job was to protect the American city from the attack they all feared was coming. The most visible of these was the Air Raid Warden. Every city block had one. These volunteers, often men too old for the draft, patrolled their neighborhoods during blackout drills. They were the enforcers of the darkness, making sure no sliver of light offered a target to a non-existent enemy. They trained for the worst-case scenario. They learned to identify types of bombs, to fight incendiary fires with sand, and to perform emergency first aid. They were the neighborhood leaders, the calm voice in the dark, preparing their neighbors for an attack that, thankfully, never came to the mainland. But the threat was real, especially on the coasts. In the early days of the war, German U-boats were sinking Allied ships with terrifying ease, sometimes within sight of the coast. To counter this, a truly unique group of heroes emerged, the Civil Air Patrol, or CAP. These were civilian pilots, men and women who owned their own small single-engine planes, Piper Cubs and Stinsons. They volunteered to fly their flying jalopies on patrol over the Atlantic, often unarmed or armed with only a simple bomb they'd drop by hand. It was incredibly dangerous work. They flew in all weather, with primitive navigation, hunting for submarines. Several CAP pilots were lost at sea, their fragile planes no match for the ocean or the enemy. They were a low-tech, high-risk, and surprisingly effective deterrent. And on the ground, 1.5 million Americans served as plane spotters. From tiny shacks on hilltops and skyscraper roofs, these volunteers stood in 2-hour shifts, 24/7, scanning the skies. They learned to identify planes by their silhouettes, phoning in reports that were plotted on giant maps. It was a human-powered radar net, a testament to the vigilance of a nation on guard. In the long, dark years of the war, a different kind of hero fought a different kind of battle, the battle for morale. Keeping the spirits of both the troops and the home front high was a strategic necessity, and an army of entertainers, artists, and volunteers stepped up to the task. The most famous of these efforts was the USO, the United Service Organizations. The USO created a home away from home for soldiers, both in the US and overseas. They ran canteens where soldiers could get a free coffee, a donut, a place to write letters, and a friendly face. Volunteers, particularly young women, served as junior hostesses. They would dance with the soldiers, listen to their stories, and provide a moment of normalcy in a world of chaos. At places like the Hollywood Canteen in Los Angeles, soldiers were starstruck to find their actual movie idols, Bette Davis, Marlene Dietrich, serving them sandwiches and pouring their coffee. Legendary performers like Bob Hope took their shows on the road, traveling millions of miles to perform for troops in the most remote and dangerous theaters of war. These shows were a vital link to home, a release from the terror and boredom of the front. But morale wasn't just about entertainment, it was about connection. V-Mail, or Victory Mail, was an unsung hero of communication. Letters were written on special forms, photographed onto microfilm, flown overseas, and then reprinted. This tiny system saved millions of tons of cargo space, ensuring the mail, the lifeline of every soldier, always got through. Back at home, artists like Norman Rockwell captured the very essence of why America was fighting. His 4 freedoms paintings, freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear, became the visual soul of the American cause. This vast, complex network of morale boosters, the volunteers, the artists, the letter writers, ensured that despite the separation, the fear, and the sacrifice, the nation and its army remained connected, united in spirit, and focused on the victory they were all, in their own way, fighting for.